Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. Ba-da-da-da-da-ba-ba-da-ba.
This is Movie Tone. Leslie Mitchell reporting. Well, here she is, Jaguar's new speedster for 1961. They're calling her the E-Type. This is the car that, more than any other, will be identified with the swinging 60s. The car that everybody who is anybody will drive. Peter Sellers, Twiggy, the Beatles' George Harrison. This is the Jaguar that will take America by storm. And watch out, Mrs. Jennings, your husband will want one of these.
Britain was a remarkably old-fashioned country in 1961. You have to remember that was the time when steam locomotives still pulled express trains throughout the country, when turboprop airliners were still being built to take you, across to Europe and America. It was a land where not many people had fridges and telephones and so on. It was deeply old-fashioned, a place of sports jackets and hats and cigarettes. You don't think that when you look at the E-Type, of course. The E-Type was so sensational because it seemed to blow away the cobwebs of that older society.
One of the reasons why the Jaguar E-Type really captured the imagination, I think, is basically because the styling fitted the new concept of femininity, the new image of what a woman should look like. This was well beyond the days of Jane Mansfield and big bosoms and points and so on. And here we had something which was sleek and slender, almost understated, and that was the image of the woman in the 60s, which has persisted to a large extent into the 1990s, which might help to account for the way the E-Type in particular has retained that very special mystique.
The reason that the E-Type was so popular was partly that it was also an accessible dream. It wasn't priced that high, and people could imagine actually one day being able to buy it. It was rather like it was possible to go out and buy a modern camera at the time and imagine you were one of the new photographers like David Bailey, or that if you were the girl next door, you could become a model like Twiggy or Shrimpton. It was realisable, it wasn't too expensive, and it had something in it that appealed to everybody.
There are many people who think of the E-Type as phallic, and sure, it's phallic, but to see it as just a phallus is really to engage in a rather sort of amateur psychoanalysis, which has come to predominate a lot of the debate about the E-Type. What people forget about the E-Type, and really cars in general, that they are hermaphroditic. They have both masculine qualities, not just the long phallic extension, but also the symbolism of pistons going in and out, and clutches and fluidity and virility and power and so on. And they also, on top of that, have very feminine characteristics as well, shown very nicely in the E-Type. Those curves, the sort of grace, the style, the elegance which goes with it, is very evocative of a feminine kind of image. And I think that's part of the enigma of cars, and particularly of cars like the E-Type, that they do have this dual sexuality, this dual symbolism.
When you look at an E-Type, you always imagine somehow that some glossy Italian in a very sharp suit designed it. It came from one of those lovely styling studios in Milan. It didn't, of course. It was designed, the actual shape came from Malcolm Sayer, the aerodynamicist and engineer. He was a real academic buff. He walked around, a big tall man, tweed jacket, quite portly, greased back hair. He didn't look like the sort of person that designs the sexiest car of the 60s. But for all that, of course, he knew that aerodynamic forms, or as close as he could approximate to those forms, would lead to something beautiful. He did it with the D-Type in the early 50s, and he did it again with the E-Type in 61.
I always refer to him as the gentle giant. Yes, well, those were very happy days developing the D-Type, and of course, you know, it's very successful in the racing field. But in our minds with Jaguar was the fact that possibly the D could be developed into a road sports car with a high performance value and be very competitive against anything that was on the market. The D-Type did start the fruits and thoughts of producing a sports car which could be sold to the public, and it evolved that we produced the E-Type. We used to use the M1 for doing the maximum speed test. Very often we would be doing 150, and other cars were there as well at doing very high speeds, the Aston Martins and other firms. It was a very useful place to do maximum speeds.
The cars had been creeping around the factory, the prototypes and so on. Everybody had glimpsed them. There was a general veil of secrecy over any new cars, and this made it all the more exciting. But the M1 motorway had recently been opened, and the rumour was always Norman's just done 150 miles an hour on the motorway, or just got from London in 40 minutes, or whatever, to be something really rather special.
We began 1957 with E1A, which was the first prototype which did the development work prior to the E-Type. But there was mixed feelings as to just how far we want to go with the car. Drawings and investigation proved that it could be made into a real good sports car. And I felt we had the potential there anyway, of being a very good sports car.
So William Lyons, the managing director, chairman of Jaguar, he was unsure about it. He really wanted to concentrate on big, fast, medium-sized saloons, of which he was very good at and which were very profitable. The E-Type had a question mark hanging over it all the time. Would it be a profitable car? But when it got near to production, and Lyons thought it was a good idea after all, he came in and gave it his wonderful, undivided attention, putting in all those little details, badges, switches, chrome strips, nice use of leather and so on, that gave the car the showroom appeal, that lifted it from being a little boffin's experimental racer into this glamorous, sexy star.
Lyons was, of course, a remarkable man, autocratic in many ways, but had this fantastic talent for both artistry in car design and marketing, knowing what customers wanted. He brought the company up in a very short period, really, and turned out some remarkable motor cars.
William Lyons had a very sort of, I suppose, special relationship with a few journalists that he knew. And what he'd do with them is invite them in for a look at the E-Type in its development stages. I mean, they'd get a chance to sort of sit in it, look at the drawings, look at 3 development stages maybe. And what it did to other journalists was make them even more eager to find out what the privileged few were having a look at. The actual privileged few then would be writing gloriously about this new car that was up and coming. This can only be described in modern terms as the classic advertising teaser campaign, which is a few people know about it, few people get access to it, and everybody else really wants to know about it.
The E-Type was launched at the Geneva Motor Show in 1961, and Sir William Lyons chose that show because it was the most glamorous one in Europe. He didn't want to launch the car in Britain because he didn't want to associate it with blimpish, rugged, open-top British sports cars that had a very primitive appeal. The E-Type was going to be a great continental tourer, as well as a very fast sports car. The funny thing about the Geneva show was that when the car arrived, it was crated up in a big box, or a big box covered it, so you couldn't see it. And the journalists were all waiting, and the public the next few days, what is this thing in the box? And when the box was lifted, there was this glistening, beautiful, sexy sports car, but standing on this threadbare Persian carpet. So you had this rather lovely idea that here was the greatest new car since, God knows what, the first sports car to run, sitting on this rather raggedy carpet. Very British, lovely British feel to it.